Her Bak Egyptian Initiate, the end of the 5th day, and I will go on to read the 6th day. Then whether it is a man, a city, or a sky, Nut is the energetic container of the Wut in it. You are right to insist on this, the sage replied, for a thorough study of Wut will save you many mistakes over the envelopes. It is a subject that lends itself to too many fantastic interpretations. To obviate this danger, we have varied Nut's symbol, in case the student fixes his thought on one only. Take Nut as the night sky. Earth is surrounded by a sky in which groups of stars make a belt of light and life. Earth receives their influences turn by turn through the annual cycle. The sky, Earth's Nut, gives birth every day to the sun, which returns every evening into her womb. Night follows day, and the Earth sleeps until morning. But during her sleep, terrestrial creatures live another life, of which they have no memory on waking. In the same way, the lives of men who are born, die, or rather sleep to awake to a different kind of life in the duat, succeed one another. The nightly sleep may end sooner or later in an eternal sleep if Ka and Ba are not reunited in the lower man who has failed to cultivate an affinity with them. As for the discarnate man who, quote, passes to his Ka, unquote, all he has taken into his consciousness, vital, spiritual, or instinctive experience, is written in his personal Nut, and what is written affects, in its kind, the centres, forms, or spiritual states of his being, which thus become his creations. We show this personal Nut as a tree whose fruits are the sum of or harvest of lives lived by a human Ka. I'm going to read that again. We show this personal Nut as a tree whose fruits are the sum or harvest of lives lived by a human Ka. There is an image of Nut in a sycamore tree. Thorf Seshat writes the name of the man whose Ka this is on the last of them, and is its celestial Nut feeds it with these same fruits, harvest of its lives. The root of the tree is in earth as long as the man works out his terrestrial destiny in a series of rebirths. Its trunk is Nut's body, or the man's if he has become fully conscious. Its branches and interlaced leaves are in the sky. They are his own emanations, envelopes, energetic or spiritual states in which he was at one with cosmic states of the same kind. They are centres or planes of registration which preserve and sum up the experience of the, quote, person, unquote, and decide his fate. I should detail these centres or planes, show you the relationship between the human egg and each fruit of the sycamore. But to do this would go beyond the scope of this lesson. Sleep, Her Bak. If you are to hear instruction tomorrow, it will be the same subject under other names and from another viewpoint. At this point, I'm going to mention the similarities in this that I see between the lover's image in the initiate's way, which has a tree, a living tree growing up the spine of one of the characters and living fire going up the side of the other. I will perhaps use that as an image when I post this, so that will probably be the image that you will see. Moving on to the 6th day. Her Bak waked more than he slept, possessed with anxiety lest he forgot what he learned. He welcomed the master, saying, "If I have really understood what you have taught, the human body is a perceptible appearance of other forms, more or less spiritual, whose togetherness constitutes individuality. The survival time of each differs according to the degree of its harmony with the man's ma'at." "That is correct," said the sage, "if your understanding of, quote, form, unquote, is correct likewise." The weariness of sustained effort marked Her Bak's face. "Master," he begged, "how without error can I imagine states so complex? Our symbol shows the bird Ba and the Ka, the shade destiny, in separation. Yet you speak of their simultaneous presence in the human being. You talk about their differences and their kinship. If death parts them, what becomes of them in the Duat? What happens to the me that was their image on earth? We name places where they sojourn, the island, Nesser, the field of reeds, the field of offerings. Are they symbols or realities? It troubles me. Can you give my heart peace?" The sage understood the true measure of his disciple's effort, but he was unwilling to compromise an intuitive awakening by soothing his disquiet. "Symbols," he said, "are always a mystery for the man who isn't open-faced, whose inner senses aren't awake, so that he can only perceive the earthly, tangible aspect of things. Call the mistress of heaven Hathor to your aid, Hathor, who holds earth, heaven, and the Duat in contemplation. Hathor, mother of your god, house of divine Horus, of, quote, your nectar that is in your egg, unquote. Make her eyes yours, that you may see celestial luminaries. Make your ears so quiet that they may hear the word of the celestial bull. Let your nostrils, obedient to the rhythm of its breath, inhale life and know it. Let your mouth, scorning idle words, learn to utter the words of Ma'at. Then you will see the meaning of the symbols that were drawn by the open-faced and open-hearted, those who can see Hathor's other aspect. It was wise when you framed your question to associate the idea of various regions with that of states of being in the Duat. You can't separate them, just as Nut, N-W-T, or city is an assemblage of atmospheres emanating from heaven and from men, which give the city its character. So also a man's Nut is a complex of influences and impressions that sum up the states of his successive personalities. In the same way, a region of the Duat is an environment clearly distinct from another, to which those whose disposition and state are in affinity with it are drawn. If you see this, you will understand the idea of coming or passing from one atmosphere to another, by which we indicate the action of I cannot say that word. Ineluctable power. The law of selective affinity that imposes itself between things, states and beings of the same kind. It was in this sense that the texts say of the dead man, quote, he has come to the land of life. You have come living. He has come in his name of, in the capacity of such and such a netter or function. As if you said, he has passed into the state of. He has taken the nature of. Now, in traditional tarot, the image of dead beings rising from the grave on the Judgement image springs to mind in relation to this. Her Bak gave his mind to this. It means that I have to develop another way of thinking. May I ask whether there is a space or distance between these places? Space and time are relative to conditions. A gnat's life seems as long to its time consciousness as its many years to an elephant. For the immortal spirit there is neither time nor space. Through its human situation it is in relations with both, but remains unaffected, since in its divine nature it is simultaneously aware of all dimensions and all durations. But this, Her Bak, can't yet penetrate your intelligence. This is why you must teach yourself by symbols, for they are the quickest way from the world of appearance to the world of reality. Remember that to speak of the regions of the duat is to speak of the states of being and his metamorphosis. If you visit known or unknown countries in your sleep, it is your astral body that travels, while your physical body lies on the bed. The two bodies are linked by a subtle cord, the breaking of which causes death. The form that goes out of you is part of what will be your shade. It has the properties your physical body lacks because its subtler substance is not subject to the same laws. It can wander space without physical means. It can go through walls. Physical obstacles don't exist for the non-physical, but spiritual states, worlds, bodies are inaccessible to it in the same way as a wall is impenetrable to your body. Time and space have a very different relation with it from what your intellect conceives. Besides, you have certainly had extraordinary adventures, lasting a long time, in dream, brought on by some incident a moment before you woke up. In this case, your mental and intuitive consciousness evokes images of scenes lived through by your astral body, showing the difference between your physical concept of time and space and what the astral body knows of them. You can have consciousness, then, of the lowest of such invisible bodies or states. If, moreover, you awaken your inner ear and succeed through the intelligence of the heart in perceiving the qualitative analogy between certain vegetables and certain living beings, you put your ka in contact with theirs. And this mode is the more subtle as you seek the experience after elimination of the mental factor, and without making it depend on your personal impressions and tastes. Such consciousness of the ka is of a higher grade than the astral or emotional consciousness, and although the shade may be, as it were, the clothing of your lower ka, it necessarily shares the higher experience, which makes it subtler and less tyrannical than its earthly affinities. Climb a step higher. Try to relieve some experience in which your lower inclinations fought with the heart's wisdom. Remorse over some fault, or the quenching of an egoistic desire, which wrote a memory of real importance in your consciousness. Consciousness of this order directly touches your divine ka and enriches your fate body. In yet higher states, the lower personality is liberated. The wise man can attain them on earth, and they are perfected in the duat by those who gain possession of their car. Our texts refer to this when they hail Nut in the name of a ladder. In his own ladder the man must climb the progressive consciousness of his own Nut, whose richness grows with each metamorphosis. I see this, said Her Bak. I catch sight of what we must understand by the regions of the Duat, certainly not fields, rivers, or islands. We have to present men with familiar images, since for the most part they are incapable of the abstract. However, another example will show you the reason for the symbols we choose. You have seen desert mirages. If they seem to depict real landscapes, they are deceptive and upside down. Thus it is with illusory pictures of the field of reeds. Everything that is registered in the emotional life is reflected in the robe of Nut, or Akashic screen, and lasts for a time that is determined by the life of the lower consciousness involved. Those who live in the field of reeds are such as still feel drawn by their shade to the attractions of earthly existence. They relive the mirage that was their life, still in the grip of hostile forces that present their passing to a higher state. It is, in the other world, as in this, slaves of the me, whom the tyrannical inclinations of the lower ka hold back from the higher, strive to increase the number of their companions in slavery. The field of reeds and the field of offerings are to be regarded as inferior heavens. They are shown with lakes and streams because men float there in a state of uncertainty, awaiting successive changes, with islands to signify that one is stuck in certain conditions, with fields because it is a question of making one's own plant grow in the marshes. A new subtle body that is conformable with the new state of affairs, fit to show the, quote, true face, unquote. Now comes a term in the island, Nesersur, which can't be located in time or space, but is intermediary between earth life and the field of offerings. To sojourn there is a first beatitude. Nesersur means a state created by the ceaseless play or circulation of the two fires or energetic forces N and S, which take shape in earthly creatures. These are the fires that colour and specify a man's nature or disposition. That is why it is said regarding Nesersur that, quote, the heir rejoins his father to make sure of his inheritance and the continuation of the paternal name on earth, unquote. There is reference here to the occult link and instinctive affinities of character between the discarnate father and the son who bears his name. One might think of Nesersur as a subtler earth that reflects tendencies, dispositions, and their universal aspect. It is in this, quote, place, unquote, that the discarnate man must exhaust and consume his instinctive desires until the time comes when, having quenched his thirst, he is free to recover his, quote, true face, unquote. Has this, asked Her Bak, the same meaning as something else you said? Wholly to recover his own word, which is to realise his own ma'at. The master showed satisfaction. You have taken the point. That is why the weighing of the heart is said to take place in that region. For when purification is accomplished, it is no longer the me that is in command, but the sa. the one who, having mastered the fires, possesses his heart, his car, and may pursue the development of his consciousness through the metamorphosis that takes place in these lower regions in peace. Why must there still be such changes? Before he gains the supreme bliss of the higher heavens, the man must have renewed his consciousness of all intermediary stages, states of becoming that are reflected on earth in various states of life. If during earth life he has succeeded in identifying his whole being and his functions with the functional netters and cosmic powers, further metamorphoses are unnecessary, and he is ready to, quote, become like one of them, unquote, free from the world of appearance. But if his experience is still incomplete, he will await in the beatitude of the field of offerings the time for his return to earth, gathering the fruits of experience without being separated from his bar or his car. In this way there is reborn a being who will incarnate on earth as a higher consciousness than before. Is it true that a man may return to earth several times? Asked Her Bak in surprise. Many times if he hasn't, quote, acknowledged, unquote, his car. But the person doesn't benefit consciously from this. It doesn't know it. For individual consciousness only lives through the car. In such a case, it can hardly be said that there is reincarnation, but continuity of instinctive life in confusion with other instinctive lives. It is useless to teach this to those whose life is only instinctive. As for a man who has acquired the consciousness of the car, he must learn to increase his sense of responsibility and of the fact that everything he does will have its consequences. He must be personally instructed in these matters. We generally leave to be understood by words and allegories that conceal in the broad idea of the renewal of life that of a repetition of births. It is for such a man we symbolise the regions and states, the judgments that determine waiting periods in the duat, with tests or beatitudes appropriate to the measure of his liberation. It is for him that we insist on the necessity of preserving the memory of the earthly name, for it is a factor in reincarnation. Statues, tombs, decorated with the scenes of daily life, have the advantage that they attract the car and assure its reincarnation in the same region or line of descent. This isn't the moment to give proofs and the reasons that justify this, but I will explain two relevant symbols. I spoke of Meskhent and Renenutet, who are present at the weighing of the heart. They are present at birth as well. You remember that the name Ren, if judiciously chosen, is a formula indicative of individual identity and defines the personal cycle in which possibilities are realised. Also, well or ill bestowed, the name, being pronounced, becomes the image that the man who bears it will evoke in men's memories. Ren Nutet is the perpetual movement in the functions of nature. It is the necessity of the cycle, every function giving rise to the next, so inevitably that the end sets up an analogous re-beginning at the point where the cycle started. It is Renenutet who turns the humours of a mother's blood into milk. It is she who makes the sap rise when the time of Osirian lethargy is over. It is she who feeds the radicals of the buried seed and the grain in the ear of corn. the root of the tree and its fruit. It is through Renenutet that the Jed, the pillar of Osiris, is raised in nature or man, and it is she who, when he has reawakened the fire of life in his Jed, leads it to the summit, the frontal uraeus that is the third eye of Horus. Yet another synchronicity, which I will explain at the end, in regards to the uraeus serpent coming from the third eye in the pathworking in the initiate's way. Then the netters fear him, for this eye of fire masters them and rules their blind powers. Thus, Renenutet is an agent of all renewal, as for instance of the annual cycle in the sky. She wraps the newly born in the orbit of his personal cycle, cradles him in his own rhythm, and supports him within the limit of his possibilities. She preserves the name of every species and individual, since she is the compass of the particular cycle that governs their periodic return. Meskhent is the expansive force that makes outer arise from inner, brings things to light, causes what was within to be born, the child, the skin, the subtle envelope every man spins from himself, and thanks to which he can respire, breathe in radiant light. During terrestrial life, these two powers form an integral part of the individual and his newt. Death separates them from the body, but they remain attached to the surviving entity by affinity of the name, with this meskhent, or skin, that conserves his imprint. If there is rebirth, they reappear and make the link with the previous life. Renenutet as guardian of the terrestrial cycle, Meskhent as the womb in which the being who is to reincarnate is reborn in the Duat. This is what is meant by texts that speak of the Meskhent house, inhabited by the discarnate in the lower heaven. Quote, house, unquote, or, quote, jar, unquote, as they call it. This house in this night of birth is a jar, they say. Such a place of sojourn, house or subtle envelope, is the meskhent, in which the me should efface itself without trace and give way to the sa, the essential principles of the living entity. This will be realized when all thirst is quenched, all dust swept away. You understand that thirst is the power of passional tendencies, dust the heterogeneous residue of the me. At this stage, the sa can ascend in the field of offerings, where it will find the spiritual abundance of a higher state and will eat the fruits of consciousness acquired during life on earth in beatitude. The characteristics of the field of offerings is the possibility of becoming spirit among spirits. When the trials of the field of reeds are over, the spirit can emerge from the darkness of the swamps. Her Bak interrupted. It is written that it will find its meskhent there. Yes, but purified and glorious. Don't let these images trouble you, Her Bak. The awakening of a higher consciousness wipes out illusory forms, replaces them with vision of the causes that brings about these effects. The new being's vision develops and is purified in successive stages as different from one another, as the stages of transformation from grub to chrysalis, nymph, butterfly. Shall we call these stages worlds, regions, or bodies? Each has a particular life, with creatures of the same disposition. This constitutes its world. And each change is only a purification, a divestment of transitory forms acquired on earth that shut out the vision of a luminous reality. But listen again to what you must know about the lower heavens. Access to the field of reeds is by purification in water and in the marshes. Then, our texts say the purified one is thought of in heaven as Sa, Orion, with whom he now identifies himself, and Sothis will be the third element of the triad that leads to the happy Sa, to the sources of life, Nefer of the heavens. Note that Sa, Orion, is with Sothis, the constellation that rules the Osirian periods of earth and men. Thus the human Sa is Osirian and should be reborn on earth as Osiris is reborn in vegetation at the time of renewal. The characteristic of the island Neserser is the fixation of consciousness of that which has the nature of earth and fire. That is why we locate there the struggle between the fires N and S, which accounts for the judgment there of the dual heart Ab-Tek, as well as the presence of the terrestrial ancestors and animals. It is there that a man becomes son of Geb, the netter of earth. But there is one possibility in the duat. We are advised to, quote, avoid the waterways of the west and choose the ways of the east, unquote. That has not to do with the way of Osiris, but the way of Horus, and it will be the 7th day's lesson. I will put text below regarding the pathworking that I mentioned earlier and the Uraeus serpent.